Hello, everyone. My name is Aaron Christensen, and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, celebrating classic horror throughout history with new episodes every Friday night. Tonight, we journey into the heart of Gothic horror with Roger Corman's moody and mesmerizing adaptation of Edgar Allan Poe's short story. Released in 1960, this film marks the beginning of Corman's AIPoe Series, his celebrated octet of Poe-inspired works, and it's an atmospheric triumph of mood and style. Leading the cast is the legendary Vincent Price in one of his most memorable roles, as the fragile and haunted Roderick Usher, a man convinced that his family line is cursed and must come to an end. Belying the film's moderate budget, Corman and cinematographer Floyd Crosby's rich dramatic lighting lend a grand visual presence. Daniel Haller's stylized Usher sets become a living extension of the family's doom, while Les Baxter's moody musical cues evoke a decaying grandeur. So settle in and prepare to enter a cinematic fever dream. This is House of Usher, where the past is never dead, only buried alive.
Where is she? You buried your own sister alive?
I did. But she's dead now.
The master hand of the macabre creates its masterpiece.
This is not a haunted house. This is the House of Usher, celebrating its 65th anniversary, and we've got an amazing panel to chat about it with me. Let's bring everybody in. Let's say hello to Dave M. Gray from Raiders of the Podcast.
Hi. I'm wearing polka dot socks and banana hammock, but you ain't ready for that.
The man, the legend, David Del Val.
Yes, sir. Here I am.
And our intrepid Brazilian correspondent, Jorge Didaco.
Evil is not just a word, it is a reality. I'm so happy to be here.
And we are going to be chatting about the House of Usher from 1960, and we'll also talk about its spiritual sister, The Pit and the Pendulum from 1961. And yes, we will in fact be talking spoilers for these ancient movies, so prepare yourselves. Thanks for coming on the show, everybody, and welcome. Jorge and David, I'm so glad you're on the show tonight. This is your first time in the doc's office, so thank you and welcome. And Dave Gray, this is a big one for us. I'm excited.
Is it?
It is.
Oh.
How did you, Dave, come to House of Usher and Corman and the AIPoes for the first time?
Well, I live disturbingly close to Baltimore, and Poe is everywhere. There's Poe restaurants, there's Poe banana hammocks, there's Poe shirts, there's Poe, you name it. Everything but a theme park. And they tried to do a theme park. But that did not go. So it's always just been there. Like, I think they all ran on TV like every other day when I was young. I think I still have old Betamax from when my great uncle bootlegged them in Italy. So
awesome. David, I know you grew up with these films, so
I did. Well,
how did you come to Corman?
Well, I grew up during the drive-in period, and American International Pictures was almost catering to the drive-in high school crowd of which I was a part. So I saw almost every AIP, double bill, triple bill. At one point, living in Sacramento, the Skyview Drive-In had 5 AIPs. They did 5 of Karloff. They did 5 Poes. They did 5 Bikers. They premiered Wild in the Streets that way. But I saw House of Usher right here in Hollywood in a summer that my mother brought me down here, the summer of 1960, which was also the year of Psycho. And Psycho let gentlemen change the landscape of cinema forever. And when we talk about Pit and the Pendulum, I will show you how Psycho even became part of the Poe series by the fact that we have a character so weak that a parent can take them over, their personality completely, whether it's Mrs. Bates or Don Medina or I've forgotten for a moment. I've forgotten what Vincent's. Oh, Sebastian Medina. Yes.
Yep. Thank you, Jorge. How about you?
I think I saw House of Usher even before I was born, Aaron. It's a legend that circulates around the house of the Didacos. The day my parents went out to watch at the local drive-in House of Usher revival in 1966, it was the same very night I was conceived. I was born. Yes, I was born under the sign of the Ushers. I keep seeing myself as one of those twisted portraits by Bert Schomburg, J.G. Usher, sex deviant or something like that. But really, the first time I saw House of Usher, it was here in São Paulo at a retrospective of Roger Corman. They brought 6 or 7 films from him. It was a small retrospective, and I saw House of Usher on the big screen, along with The Trip and the Wild Angels. I think from the cycle, it was only House of Usher they brought. And it was a huge impact on me. I remember I was in the second year of college. I was studying theater and dance, and I was so impressed by the beauty, the sinuosity, the trance-like, the colors, phrasing, the words. It was also choreographed. As someone studying dance, I saw the choreography of the movements of the characters. So it's only 4 characters in the house. The choreography of those characters, the patterns, the compositions, the framing. It was so beautiful and so charming. It was an enchantment. This first vision of House of Usher.
Thank you. That's good, Jorge. I appreciate that. David, I know that you've done commentary tracks on several Blu-ray releases for these films. I don't think it's possible to overstate the importance of this film to the career of Roger Corman and to the career of Vincent Price. Kind of set the scene for us in terms of like where this lands in cinema.
Well, okay. Well, first of all, before any of that, American International Pictures was in business in the 50s, and Roger Corman and Sam Markoff all worked at AIP. And in 1960, they decided, Sam and Jim Nicholson decided they wanted to make an A picture from their point of view. They had $250,000, and of course that's in 1960 money. And they decided even before Dick Matheson wrote the script, they said, we want Vincent Price. And Vincent Price had already done House on Haunted Hill.
Right.
And so his name meant something in that genre. He did House of Wax before that, but many years, that was 1953. They offered him $50,000 to play Roderick Usher, and that was part of their budget. Then the rest of it went to Danny Howler to create the sets, and they gave Dick Matheson $10,000, I guess. Matheson fashioned a story. Now, remember, Usher had been filmed before in France, and Curtis Harrington would do a version of it. In fact, the last film Curtis ever did was Usher. Usually, Madeline and Roderick are played by the same person. But the movie was a gamble because Arkoff didn't believe you could make a horror movie without a monster. And famously, when asked, I guess it was Matheson or Corman, what is the monster? And they both replied, the house is the monster. And then
Yep.
they said to Vincent, can you help? And Vincent said, well, let's see the script. And at one point, Matheson has like, the house breathes, it moves. And Vincent said, okay, I know exactly what to do with that. But me as a little kid that grew up with Vincent, and he was my favorite, he and Karloff and Lugosi and Christopher Lee and Peter, they were all my favorites, as they were everyone of my generation. But he shaved off his beard.
His mustache, yeah.
Mustache was gone. And he bleached his hair white as a newt. And he said at the time he admired Conrad Veidt. And he wanted to look like someone that had been completely bleached from lack of the sun. And so it all paid off. A lot of it was Vincent's enthusiasm. And you know, he was very much, you know, House of Usher cemented for him the horror star for the next 20 years. It was just a great experience for all of them. But like I said to Aaron yesterday when we were talking privately, I said, Usher opened the door for the other 7 pictures. But rest assured, if Usher had not made money, there would not have been Pit and the Pendulum. But then Pit and the Pendulum, really, to my mind, is the quintessential Poe film. It's got everything, and Vincent is so crazy in that. When I had him on, I did a whole hour with him, and we looked at the clip where he does "Do You Know Where You Are, Bartolome?" And the look on his face, he said, "Oh my God!" I said, "Oh yeah." I said, "Imagine me looking at that at 10 years old or 11 years old, however old that was."
That's a great place to kind of jump in because Dave, like, what was your first experience with Vincent Price, and how does it compare with his turn as Usher?
Oh, well, you know, that was the 13 Ghosts of Scooby-Doo, Aaron, in 1980 something. So, you know, they're different. They're a little, it's a wide career of weird things, but they're not the same. I love his Usher. It's also weird. I can never get over the blonde. The blonde wigs me out on Vincent Price. I don't know why. It just breaks something in my head. But I adore his Usher. The pure fatality throughout all of it.
Jorge, how about you? Where did you come to Vincent Price for the first time?
I really don't remember. Maybe the Dr. Fab's films, but I think it was Usher that really made me notice Vincent Price for the first time. I love the blonde hair. I love the bleach. I love the appearance. I love the first appearance of Vincent Price in the film. That red robe looks like a cardinal from a conclave, like a high priest of something. It's incredibly interesting his first appearance. I think it was the first impact of Vincent Price for me. It was in House of Usher.
I think I probably, David, kind of going back to Pit and the Pendulum, I think I saw Vincent Price for the first time in Pit and the Pendulum. And coming back around to Usher, he's not gone full Vincent. Watching the film again recently, having seen scores and scores of Price performances, I'm really impressed by his reserve as Usher. And even though his reticence to being touched and the loud noises, he has such a sensitivity to external stimuli, he even underplays that, which I find just really, I love his performance here in a way that I don't think I'd appreciated in the past.
He's also very wickedly funny, I think, in some moments. I love the reply to the God willing, when he asks Mark Damon if he's going to have children with Madeline. Mark Damon responds, "God willing, yes, I will." And the way he replies, he uses the God willing with such contempt and weak disgust, as if the idea of God willing and children in the same sentence would be absolutely repugnant idea. I think this little macabre humor already appears in the performance here.
He's suicidal and also homicidal. Like, he has to bring the line to an end. I will kill my sister before I allow her to have children and extend the line any further. David, when we were talking yesterday, we were talking about how Price, basically he owns this film. Like, he outclasses his co-stars.
They couldn't hire the other actors because they gave all the money to him. No, actually, Mark Damon is fine. He was hired because of his looks. Myrna Fahey, who died not long after Usher, I know very little about her, They're all okay. You know, the thing about House of Usher, Vincent had done a movie many years before called Dragonwick, in which he played a character very similar to Roderick Usher. And when you talk about him not being touched, he borrowed that from Boris Karloff in The Mummy. If you recall Imhotep, Ardith Bey, when they reach out to give him a handshake, he goes, "1,000 pardons, I do not like to be touched," an Eastern prejudice. And he's very still in that. Vincent borrowed from he was a big moviegoer. He saw everything, and he had, of course, been on Broadway in the 30s. What I found interesting, I didn't know until just recently, Harry Ellerby, that plays the butler, he's the only other character in the movie. Harry Ellerby had been on Broadway with Vincent back when he first started in the late 30s with Helen Hayes. So I'm beginning to think that Vincent suggested Harry Ellerby, because he would do that. He got John Sutton working in movies that he was in. David Frankham, who's in 3 or 4 of Vincent's movies, was because of Vincent suggesting. Vincent was very generous with other actors. Usher opened the door for the Poe series as it became. And it really, all of the movies, including Ligeia, maybe Mask of the Red Death is a little different, but they're all about a young man coming to a house. They're all about a young guy coming to a house, and if there's any women around, no. Vincent will do it. He used to say to me, "I make late wife movies." He said, "If they're not dead by the second reel, they're dead in the third." And all of the women, you know, Haunted Palace is very interesting because Vincent is not really interested in women until he gets possessed by his ancestor. Then he goes after Deborah Paget with a vengeance. And believe me, Charles Beaumont, all these guys that wrote these stories for Vincent, they all were aware of his personality and they fashioned the characters around it. Vincent always played these peculiar, kind of asexual people. And Pit and the Pendulum is the most outrageous of all of them. And I remember when Price died, Channel 7, I knew he was gone because all of a sudden I saw this clip on the 6 o'clock news that was the pendulum scene. And I knew he was been ill anyway. But when I think of him, I guess a lot of fans, maybe all you guys, when you think of him, you might think of Dr. Phibes perhaps, but I really think it's Pit and the Pendulum that even when he did the Dr. Goldfoot movies, you know, when he at the end of Beach Party, he's Big Daddy and he goes, "Get my pendulum, kiddies, I feel like swinging." So I mean, it was his signature, I think.
What do you think, Dave? Like, what do you think of this as a Poe adaptation? Because obviously Richard Matheson is having to extrapolate to make a full-length feature out of this.
Yeah, as a Poe adaptation, it's not. But Poe wrote short work. Very few survive. I think for what Matheson did, it's really good. But he took, you know, the Poe highlights. There's Buried Alive. There's a certain kind of madness. So yeah, they work it well, but it's not a great telling of the story, to be fair.
Do you like the script overall?
Oh, I do. I love it. But if we're talking as an adaptation, it's fine. It's not the worst.
I'm impressed, as I am with all of his adaptations, on how well he was able to kind of start with a kernel of an idea and just kind of spin it out into something that approached feature length. I do like the fact that these movies are pretty short. You know, both of these clock in right around 80 minutes. Jorge, do you have a favorite of the Poe films?
I think I like them all. They're also distinct and they're very similar in structure. I like that. Speaking of the adaptations of Richard Matheson, that almost 3 acts and practically Poe appears practically only in the third act. Now, the first 2 acts are just things that are elaborating to the climax. What is Poe is basically the climax, the third act, the final act. And so it was very. I like them all. I think they're all interesting. They all have some their particular peculiarities and interesting things going on in them. I love them all.
I do want to say I'd party with any of the Ushers. You know, they're going through this. This is my rogues gallery. I would party with all of them. All right, that's all I'm saying. Yeah, all of them.
All of them. Me too. All of them.
Dave, you and I were talking about the paintings, Jorge, that you were mentioning, the paintings that were done by Bert Schoenberg.
Yeah. Well, first of all, at the very end of it all, Vincent did for AIP an evening with Edgar Allan Poe, where he read 4 stories, including Pit and the Pendulum, exactly as they were written, with makeup by himself, but it was a reader's theater, but he was on sets that his wife did the costumes, Mary did the costumes, and it's available on one of the double feature, I think Tomb of Ligeia. So you guys can watch it. It's an evening with Edgar Allan Poe, and it's Vincent doing Pit and the Pendulum, Telltale Heart, but they're all pure Poe. And they never released it, but it's available now. But when you talk about the Black Cat segment in Tales of Terror, what Dick Matheson did, he took Cask of Amontillado.
Right, just married them together.
The fact that Peter Lorre is Montresor, he's a wine expert, a drunk, but that is how The Raven got started, was the fact that Vincent and Peter were so funny as Laurel and Hardy, tall and skinny and fat, and one was a drunkard and one was a very effeminate guy who for some reason wanted his wife, which is it's a joke. They also did that in Mask of the Red Death. They took hop frog and incorporated, with Poe, you're right, Dave, the stories are short. However, Usher has more of a story to it than anything else they adapted, because The Raven's just a poem, and they made a comedy out of that.
And I agree. I mean, I think Usher does have the most complete story, and that's why they end up retelling that story, as you said,
over and over again.
Like it just becomes kind of the same story of an outsider coming in. Dave?
Oh, well, I have a question that David might know, because I know when they first announced Usher, there were like 6 other Poe films being developed at other studios. Like 1959, there was just a flood of them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. There were like 6. I was just wondering if there was something to kick that off. I've never seen anything that mentioned that. And
before my time, is Hammer Films. In 1958, when Hammer released The Horror of Dracula, or Dracula in the UK, every country in the world by 1959 and 1960 had a Dracula. A Mask of the Demon, Black Sunday was in Italy. El Vampiro was in Mexico. In Japan, they had one. Turkey had one. Every country took a tip from that. And Hammer, I'll tell you something, the Italian Gothic Renaissance of 1961 was kick-started by Pit and the Pendulum.
Yep.
Pit and the Pendulum opened in Europe. And that's why Barbara Steele made so many Italian horrors after that. It's because they all saw her, even though she was dubbed, in Pit and the Pendulum for the 10 minutes she's in it. And they decided, hey, she's living here. Let's put her in some cobwebs and see what happens.
Black Sunday was in wide release while Pit and the Pendulum was in production.
Was in release the same year as House of Usher.
Right. I mean, that's what I'm saying. Like, that's where they're like, we need to get Barbara Steele and use her to great effect, I would say.
That's exactly what they thought.
Yeah.
But it's funny. There was in 59, or maybe even in the same year, they did a British version of the Telltale Heart, pretty pure, where a man is cuckolded and he can see the woman he's interested in across. He has an apartment directly facing her bedroom window, and it's a very kind of daring movie for the period. And I'm trying to think if there wasn't another Usher somewhere. I'm sure there was. But as far as adapting the Poe titles the way AIP did, they were really the forerunners. And while they were doing them, they put Price under contract. He could not make horror films for another studio unless he got permission. Because if you notice, from 60 to 64, when Vinny was doing the Poe series, it was always an AIP film, except for Diary of a Madman and Twice Told Tales, where Twice Told Tales tried to do what Tales of Terror did, only with Nathaniel Hawthorne.
Right.
And then they did House of the Seven Gables, which they truncated into 42 minutes, which was kind of funny. And Vincent had done House of the Seven Gables back at Universal, although they switched it around too. He said, instead of it being my sister, we were lovers. But he said that's because it was Hollywood.
And don't you think that, like, the Poe, part of it is an attempt at doing a colored Gothic without Dracula, without Frankenstein, without any of those kind of universal icons. And you've got Poe, who's in the public domain, it kind of lending itself to that atmosphere. I feel like that. I mean, I love the fact that you got Hammer feeding into
romance. Remember that ghost stories were not in fashion in 1960, and then Jack Clayton did The Innocents, which
61.
Everybody flipped out over. And then Deborah Carr, they wanted to hand her a candelabra to run around in the dark in for the next 4 movies. But Deborah had a bigger career than that. Although she did make this one kind of fun movie called Eye of the Devil with Sharon Tate, just before Sharon Tate married Polanski. But yeah, I mean, even Polanski did Fearless Vampire Killers, which was a kind of his homage to Hammer films. Hammer films and AIP were the reason that we monster kids had this revival of horror.
And they were just feeding off of each other. Like, you know, you would see
and
them.
Then they made movies together. The Vampire Lovers was a Hammer AIP co-production. By that time, they brought lesbians into it, which let's get those lesbians in there.
Never a bad thing.
I just wasn't sure if there was something else on top. Like, yeah, Hammer's always the answer, generally.
Yeah, and they brought color and sex into it. There's not a lot of sex in the Poe films.
No, well, look who we're dealing with as our headliner. The entire 8 films of the Poe cycle happens in the space of 5 years, you know, from 1960 to 1964. It's just cranking them out. When you think about these films, what are some of the images that come to mind, especially from Usher and Pendulum?
Let's talk a little bit more about because I think it's an intrinsic part of the many visual pleasures of House of Usher, especially the Bert Schoenberg. The paintings are so impressive. The first time we see the portrait of Madeline, for instance, with those extensions from their face ripping off her flesh as if something was hidden inside, that is the true nature of her is popping up through this ripped flesh in the portrait, or the very twisted, depraved portraits of the Usher lineage. These are all things that are part of this imagery that pops up in Usher, along with the colors and the fogs and that incredible nightmare dream sequence.
I want to show you guys something. I'm going to get up for a minute. This is from The Premature Burial by Bert Schoenberg.
Oh, you have that portrait, David. It's incredible.
There it is.
I mean, I have been always enamored of it. Wow, that's amazing.
And you notice the colors are all kind of purples and blues.
Yes. Yes, that's incredible. Wow, I'm so envious of that.
Well, the point is, I found this when I did the audio commentaries for these movies for what was MGMUA at the time. We had access to all the color transparencies. So I got this one, and I also have the Joseph Kerwin portrait of him up there. And I have another. Actually, I have all 3 of them because we had the slides. I could print them out. So what I did with this, which is from A Premature Burial, devotions devoutly to be wished, or whatever. Of course, it's Ray Milland. It wasn't like Vinny. But we sent this to the Philosophical Society because they did a tribute to Bert Schoenberg, who's passed on. But what you need to know about Bert is that he was a lover of Marjorie Cameron.
Yes.
Marjorie Cameron was part of the Parsons Project. She was one of Aleister Crowley. We get into the occult, the real.
Curtis Harrington made a short documentary on Marjorie Cameron called The Wormwood Star.
Wormwood Star, that Curtis Harrington. She burnt all the pictures except for, I know all about these people. I was too out of it at the time to appreciate it, but I knew Curtis very well. And Curtis would invite me to his home, which was filled with all kind of wonderful things. And he knew all these people that were much older than me. And I wasn't cognizant of what I was around. I had actually met Cameron, and I did not know her story to ask her the right questions. But she was very weird, and they all were. And Curtis, the last movie he ever did was Usher. where he plays Madeline and Roderick. These paintings, it was all part of Cafe Frankenstein, which was a 50s coffee house that Orson Welles and James Dean and Vampira would all go there and play the bongos and do music. When you see Mel Wells as the beatnik poet in Bucket of Blood or Little Shop of Horrors, it was all done in the Roger Corman used to go to this coffee place. And when Vincent Price saw these paintings, he said, well, you want somebody to do the Usher paintings? There it is. And there are pictures of Vincent with Bert, you know, who was a nice looking guy, very hip. They were all counterculture. When you're around Roger Corman, you realize that he didn't just sit and talk about stuff, which is what a lot of people do now in Starbucks. He got out and made movies every other day. If you can't give me an idea in 3 minutes, then you shouldn't be writing anything. Right. So if you can't put something together, just give me an idea, you know. And if you look at his output, the stuff he did in the Wasp Woman, Not of This Earth, you know, he did great stuff on a shoestring.
Well, and I was mentioning early on in the conversation that this was a huge kind of like leap forward for him as a director. Like he really kind of was able to attempt things that he wasn't able to do with his black and white.
Made money. The minute House of Usher broke box office records, they were on their way. And Roger would always say to me when people would say, well, what about the Poe series? He'd say, it wasn't a series. If any one of those had lost money, I'm out of here.
But they kept being successful.
They kept it right up until Ligeia. And then it wasn't a matter of money. The last one they did in Hollywood was The Haunted Palace. Right. After that, everything Vincent did in AIP horror was in England.
Was in England, right.
All the Fives movies were shot there. Cry of the Banshee, Witchfinder General. They were all shot in England. And Vincent used to say, well, they do them better there. And he's right. You know, I agree. Because anybody that shoots in Europe has access to all those old castles and chateaus. And look at the movies of Jean Rollin. He's got all these hot girls running around the countryside with French chateaus. So it looks fabulous, even though the stories aren't that all great, but who cares? You know, right. Narrative isn't everything, you know, and horror movies are notorious for not having, Italian ones especially don't make any sense, do they?
Yeah. And Jorge, you were mentioning the dream sequences. I guess that was another thing that Corman was able to bring with the introduction of color, was to do these kind of like exotic and blown out and highlighted with the colored gels and things like that.
But the dream sequence is extraordinary. It starts with, in a rather abstract form with the blue gel and the fog parallel walking through windows and frames and doors before becoming a full nightmare with the attack of the ghosts of the ushers and all that. It's an extraordinary involving and haunting sequence. Elements of the house and through what Mark Damon is experiencing there.
Floyd Crosby shot all that, but remember there wasn't a dream sequence in the Haunted Palace.
Yes,
but that's Lovecraft. But Pitt had them, Usher had them, Tales of Terror had them.
Absolutely. I think the work of Floyd Crosby here in The Pit and the Pendulum is absolutely extraordinary. It's almost like a character in itself. One of my favorite moments in Usher is at the very beginning when Philip and Mark Damon is entering the house for the first time. The camera comes within him, it pans away and then positions a little bit above everything else, like a little bird's eye view, and stays there like an active observant of all things. It continues that way. It's an active observant. It observes sinuously around that house. I think it's an incredible camera work by Floyd Crosby there.
Oh, I love how they're shot. What I also love in these are the sets, which I don't think get nearly enough love. If I walk into a cave and it doesn't have the iron grate like the Usher's catacomb, I feel cheated by nature.
I am let down.
Iron grate should just come out of the rock everywhere. But no, I adore them. They're wonderfully shot. The dream sequence, especially in Usher, is it's gorgeous. I wrote actually a whole page of notes on it because it's one of the most telling moments in the film. Price does a lot of heavy lifting, but the only thing that really steps up to his level in it is that sequence that really gives big insight into his mind and what's happening in that moment. that sets everything else up. Without that, I don't think the movie works half as well.
Well, if you look at all those movies it's Daniel Haller that did the sets.
The art direction, yeah.
Then Danny Haller became a director, and the movies that he directed, which I know you guys have seen, The Dunwich Horror with Dean Stockwell, Die Monster Die with Karloff, which is The Color Out of Space. And they shot that in England. That was Lovecraft. And Haller went from being the art director for the Poe films, and he also worked on Ligeia, but without any credit. But Danny Haller's the one that designed all those sets, and his counterpart in England was Bernard Robinson, was the set designer.
The Hammer thing from Hammer.
For Hammer. And if you look at the sets for Hammer and you look at the sets for the Poe films, both these guys, they created for very little money in many cases. You know, here in LA, Danny could borrow from Fox and other studios and move it all. You know, AIP did not have a studio. They rented out at Fox or Gower, where I'm living around where all this was shot. And Usher, the things that you're talking about, the part here around Griffith Observatory, there was a fire and all the trees were burnt. And Roger got his film crew and they went over and shot all the stuff of Mark Damon on his horse going up to the House of Usher, was right up here by the Griffith Observatory, where they shot Rebel Without a Cause. But all these guys, I mean, when you look at the Dunwich Horror, and you will see the same kind of set design that was used in Usher and Pitt. But Danny Haller's biggest set was the one for Pitt and the Pendulum. The Pendulum Room was like 25 feet. It was massive, and it was a huge room. And they used it again for a couple of days. Then the famous thing with The Raven is they shot another whole movie with Karloff right after, before they struck the sets. Roger said, I want to make another movie with Boris. He owes me 3 days. And Karloff said, you can't make a movie. And he said, watch me. And he got Jack Nicholson and everybody, Coppola, Monty Hellman, they all worked on this thing. And it's very much like a Poe film, The Terror. It's the same thing. Jack Nicholson goes to a castle. There's Boris. There's a woman there, but no, she's not really there, but she's there. And you don't want to mess with her. And then he messes with her, and then the whole place comes down. Only this time they flooded it instead of burning it.
Right.
It's the same thing. And right after that, 1963, then they were all getting ready to go to England, but they made one more, which was The Haunted Palace, which is one of my favorites because it's really, if you haven't seen it in a while, it's combining the two authors. You know, what Poe really has nothing to do with it. They just put his name on it.
Right.
But it's the case of Charles Dexter Ward. And Dan O'Bannon did a version of that called The Resurrected.
With Chris Sarandon.
Yeah, with Chris Sarandon. Which, I was telling you, Aaron, that's a very underrated, nobody talks about movie. That's also Lovecraft, you know.
Circling back to House of Usher, we've got a character in Usher. He's almost inactive. It's funny that he's kind of like our driving force, and yet he does not drive this film. He is very much about like keeping things as they are. When he allows his sister to be put into the crypt, I've seen this film before, but I'd forgotten how we see that little flicker of her fingers before he closes, or that's what causes him to close the casket lid so Mark Damon can't see it. That's something that the audience is thinking about. They immediately think about Roderick in a completely different way from that moment on, that he is somebody who is willing to put his sister to death rather than allow her to escape. And I think there's something that's truly haunting and evil around that idea.
They echo that really well in Pitt also at the end.
Well, it's the premature burial. You know, that's
right. Well, it's the idea of combining all of those Poe stories, just the ideas of them into one.
Maybe that's why they used to always film Roderick and Madeline as the same person, because Vincent Price has a death wish. He's not expecting anyone to come to that house.
Right.
But the minute he gets a load of Mark Damon, he realizes he better put her in a box or she's going to get pregnant. The immediacy is there. We got to get. Yeah, no, it's so funny because Mark Damon came to the screenings, and what a character he was. But he really wasn't much of an actor, but he became a really good producer.
Right.
But there is a television version of Usher, and I wish I can't, for some reason. I'm having a moment where I can't. I don't know whether it was Ingrid Bergman or it was. I believe it was Anthony Perkins in the 50s played Usher. But once again, Usher is always played like someone that's just trying to bury himself. See, the worst thing you can do in Westerns or horror movies is try to make a love story out of it. Cowboys love their horses. They have no use for women, Whenever you bring a woman into it, you have hell to pay, But I have to tell you guys, when I saw this in the theater as a little kid, when Madeline comes out of her coffin and starts screaming Roderick's name,
Right.
The audience actually screamed. I used to go to movies back then when I was 10 and 11 years, like The Tingler, House on Haunted Hill, Homicidal, all the Bill Castle movies with gimmicks. I was afraid to go into the theater because I would walk close to the lobby and I'd hear screams inside. Same thing when Psycho came out. Everybody screamed during that shower sequence. And when was the last time people screamed in a movie today?
Well, the idea of interacting, the idea of like engaging with the movie on that level.
Experience with anyone screaming in a theater since you've been an adult?
I mean,
but I remember that was very common back when I was a kid.
I must say something that the most frightening moment for me in House of Usher is that damn hot gruel that is boiling in that cauldron. It is absolutely disgusting. I can
no one's
imagine
going to eat that, right?
if Madeline had to eat that hot gruel every morning, I imagine I would go cataplectic or possessed, mad, whatever. I think it's the most horrific image for me is that boiling,
no overweight people,
boiling brownish hot gruel. It's absolutely disgusting. Horrifying.
I'm so glad you mentioned that though, because like, what the heck is Madeline doing in Boston anyway, that she gets to meet Mark Damon? Like that goes completely unexplained, that she's just like, they meet, they fall in love. Like, how did she get out of the house and how did she come home? Like none of that gets explored, which is very strange to me, considering how slim the story is.
Well, Matt, you have to blame Richard Matheson for that. I mean,
he's not around to blame, David. So I got to blame somebody.
Isn't that? I think that's an artifact from the Poe story, because the story has Roderick writing his friend from college because he's ill and dying.
Or Morella has a similar thing. Mm-hmm. Morella is one of the three stories in Tales of Terror.
Tales of Terror.
And that she comes from Boston because she's dying and she has no other place to go. And she goes to see her father, who isn't interested in her because of something that happened when her birth caused Morella to die.
So Richard Matheson was just playing Poe bingo, basically.
Yeah. Well, I think he had a dartboard, actually. He just
look, all these screenwriters did. Look, it was like all of them were sitting around. Can you imagine? I mean, everybody that wrote for AIP, that was what they did, whether it was Poe, Lovecraft, or trying to find a giant bug. It's no accident the Wasp Woman got made the year after The Fly.
Right.
Find me a bug that we can turn into a monster.
You got 1 week, go.
But in my personal canon, Madeline just has a thing for oil, whale oil. She just likes to rub it on herself. That's why she's sick.
Now I'm satisfied.
Yeah, there you go.
Suddenly it all makes sense. The idea of this film propelling Corman forward. When you think about Roger Corman, are these the films you think of, or do you think of the 1950s drive-in stuff?
For me, it's these. Because as I said, they were my big touchstone growing up. I couldn't throw a rock without hitting somebody watching a Poe film for like the first 20 years of my life, especially Mask of Red Death.
Jorge, what about you?
I think the Poe cycle really is the most enduring. I think they resonate incredibly well. I think with all the generations. I think they're really something special. all those films, and how they progress one from the to another. I think it's the greatest legacy. I like everything Corman. I like most of the things Corman made. I love the Bucket of Blood into the Shop of Horrors, and I love all those things. West Woman. I love all those things, but I think it's these films. Yes, I think it's the Poe cycle.
Well, don't forget the Poe films opened the door for the drug films.
Yeah.
Roger Corman was just as well known for The Trip as he was House of Usher.
Yes.
And that opened the door and The Wild Angels. That's also Corman. The biker and drug movies are a direct connection from the Poe movie. And AIP tried to be a studio that was the youth market. But you notice that when they figured out where it was at, it was usually somewhere else.
Do you think that that's why we have those psychedelic dream sequences?
Oh, yes.
Yes, I think
that's
so
why you have Bert Schoenberg's paintings. That's all peyote, cocaine, opium. But don't forget, Edgar Allan Poe was a drug addict. It's an opium dream. Then Vincent did Confessions of an Opium Eater. No, the drug culture started right after House of Usher. By 1966, and remember, Dennis Hopper and Dean Stockwell, who was in the Dunwich Hour, they all were in The Trip.
And Hopper's in Night Tide.
Yes,
and Night Tide too. That's all drugs. Cameron, the thing with the occult.
Roger Cameron. This group of painters David was speaking earlier is they were involved with the occult symbolism and Gurdjieff, and I think this evolved into the trippy imagery and the psychedelia that will pop up in The Trip, for instance. I think rewatching Pete and a Pendulum, there's a moment near the end where the distorted lens or give space to just splashes of color. The screen gets completely blue or red, green. I think these are the early steps to the dream to the psychedelic sequences in The Trip, for instance. Yes.
Well, the opening credits of Pit and the Pendulum have that creeping, the drop of oil in water and the colored filters.
Floyd Crosby's son is David Crosby of Crosby, Stills and Nash. There is not one person in the AIP canon that wasn't into drugs, rock and roll. All of it. Bruce Dern, Dean Stockwell, Susan Strasberg, the daughter of Lee Strasberg, Bert Schoenberg with Cameron. Cameron took drugs. Roger Corman went into UCLA and dropped acid before he did The Trip. Dennis Hopper, notorious.
Well, you know what else we haven't talked about? We haven't talked about Corman's predilection for Freud. And I think we see a ton of Freudian stuff playing throughout the Poe cycle.
Well, Roger used to say that women were going down corridors because it was kind of a subliminal vagina. Remember, Roger went to Stanford and studied architecture. So his introduction to Freud and Jung is kind of interesting to me. But I love Roger, but I'll tell you something. He never, ever deviated. There's a book called Interviews with Roger. I have one in it, and a lot of other people do too. And he says the same thing. He never goes off script. It is very rare if you can find an interview where Corman actually dishes, spills the tea, however you want to look at it. I could never get him to do it.
He's got his story of how things went, and that is the story.
Well, he's a smart man, and he said a long time ago, if you're a smart guy in life, you don't tell people everything you know. The less you tell them, the better. People don't need to know your business. People that talk too much, I'm one of them. People that talk too much, you lose your mystery. I'm always fascinated when I meet a guy that doesn't say very much. And Vincent does that in Ligeia. You really have to pry it out of him. Right. But he can be very chatty too. But no, I mean, Roger really didn't want you to know what was going on. It wasn't he was hiding anything. He was part of the 50s. And if you the surviving baby boomers from that period, of which I'm one, if you lived through that period, it was very Eisenhower. It was very repressive. It was very sexless. And by the 60s, all of that was about to go. And it started in 1960 when Alfred Hitchcock did Psycho. and then a few years later with Night of the Living Dead. And then from that point on, drugs and the collapse of the rating system. I just did a whole thing on pre-code movies in horror from 1929 to 1934. 1934, the code took in, and all of a sudden, married couples slept in separate beds. It was ludicrous. What were we? But that was what people were. And then the Catholics brought in the Legion of Decency, which was hideous, where Catholics were told if a movie was condemned, don't go see it. For a while, the studios were terrified of losing 60 million Catholics as ticket buyers. But they also discovered that if a movie got condemned, everybody went to see it. So you actually made money if your movie was condemned,
Well, kind of coming back to Vincent Price's performance here, I mean, I think that the nice thing about pairing House of Usher and Pit and the Pendulum is that we really do get to see his range within this manic Poe hero. He does different shades. He does variations on both of these two characters for the rest of the films in the series.
Oh, yeah. Well, Pit and the Pendulum's my favorite.
What is it that you love about Pit and the Pendulum?
I love the speech he gives when he's got John Kerr tied to the slab.
Yeah.
And he said, "Do you know where you are, Bartolome? You are about to enter hell, the nether regions, the abode of the damned, the raka, the pit, and the pendulum, the razor edge of destiny. Thus is the condition of man, found on an island from which he can never hope to escape." And I was sitting with him when he was, and I was just looking at him, and I said, "You changed everybody's life with this scene,
Yep.
And there's not a scene like that in Usher till the very end,
Right.
when he begins to hear Madeline's voice, and then I know that Matheson realized if they did another one, that they would have a sequence like that. But can you imagine? I mean, we used to laugh about it. We'd say there's never been a director that's ever worked with Vincent Price that says, "Vincent, can you give it a little more? Can you raise that up a notch?" No one ever said that to him. There's no, he was already way, you had to tone him down.
And I think that's what I loved about House of Usher was that there was much less of Vincent's face pulling and vocal histrionics. Like he really does pull it all down. And in a way that we wouldn't see again until like Witchfinder General. He's pulling it in.
Tower of London. The 90, if you saw the AIP Tower of London.
Absolutely extraordinary. Absolutely.
It's Richard III, yeah.
I think it's one of his best.
I did the audio commentary for that, and I got in trouble for it. I said, "This man is camp. His feet do not touch the ground." And I was embarrassed for him, honestly, because he really overdid it in a way that he knew better. He was a far better a performance like that in the minds of the wrong people. It was movies like Tower of London that made a lot of people think Vincent Price was a ham.
Mm-hmm.
He was a much better actor. Than
He's a skilled. If you see things like Laura, where he really is
back in the 40s.
Right.
It takes a lot in 1962 when everybody sees Tower of London and he's like climbing the walls and leering and no one can. I mean, my God, it was just my kingdom for a horse. No, forget the horse. I'm gonna run. And he's just insane. And then everybody took it from there. And of course, Pit and the Pendulum started that. He went over. I loved it that he went over. But I loved it that he went over in Pit and the Pendulum. When he went over in Tower of London, it was too much.
I'm secure enough in myself to say, like, if I did like men, I'd be married to a Vincent Price impersonator. Like, I know that. Why deny that?
No, I mean, that was like the open secret. I mean, I used to get people asking me if Vincent Price was gay. And I would always begin by saying, before I answer that, would it make a difference to you in appreciating his work as an actor? Because that's really more important to me than whether we talk about someone's personal life. But I will say this, everyone that wrote these things knew that. And I think Vincent explored his homosexuality in his roles, particularly when he finally plays Butch in Theater of Blood. He's the hair. I sat with him with that when he says, dishy hair. Can't wait to get my hands on it. And then he looks at the policeman and to the woman he's about to marry, by the way, Coral Brown, who was also
right.
those two were a pair. But also understand this. Vincent Price was brought into Hollywood in the late 30s when, like people that want public office, you've got to have a wife. You've got to be straight. There is absolutely, it's a career death knell to come out as gay. And look at Richard Chamberlain. I can name you 4 actors right now that are still in the closet because it's not convenient for them to come out. Right. It's different now. And Vincent was bisexual because he has 2 children, and his daughter is gay, Victoria, and it's no secret anymore. But his acting style was very much part of the theater. Laurence Olivier was that way. Alec Guinness was gay. Obi-Wan Kenobi, man. But I do think that there is a queer factor to his interpretation of these roles.
All of them, yeah.
I don't think I could have said that even 5 years ago. Nor have I ever written it that way. I implied it when I did the commentary for Tower of London. And one of the reviewers said, and I quote, "I don't know David Del Val, but based on this, I think he might be a friend of Dorothy." This was an English critic, and I don't like the good reviews. I like the bad ones. I like the ones where they get a little dishy. But that's cool. Honestly, I don't think that it's a derogatory thing in any. I would never say that if I thought it was. But right. I do think it's the elephant in the room if you don't address it.
Agreed. Jorge, thoughts on Vincent
There's
Price?
I think there's one extraordinary moment with Vincent Price in Pete and the Pendulum, which he transforms into his father to a laugh and just a super transformation of his face and his expression is absolutely extraordinary. It's one of my favorite moments in the film.
Well, that is from Psycho. That is Norman Bates, who is so weak that he can only be himself when he is his mother. Now, what Richard Matheson did, he said Sebastian Medina was a heterosexual maniac, as was Joseph Kerwin in The Haunted Palace. And if you don't think Charles Beaumont didn't know what was up with Vincent, because in Haunted Palace, Joseph Kerwin, when he's possessed by Joseph Kerwin, he tries to rape Deborah Paget. When they go into the palace and he's Charles Dexter Ward, they're like brother and sister. And Vincent's very fey indeed, as he was in The Raven. I'll tell you a funny story. Vincent once said to me, we were driving to this film set from A Whisper to a Scream, and he goes, I don't know quite what to do. I'm about to do a PBS commercial for AIDS, and I don't know if I should. I mean, I don't know about and I looked at him and I said, Vincent, after your performance in The Raven, you have nothing to do. And he looked at me for a minute like I thought, maybe I've finally gone too far. But he got it because he was very effeminate in The Raven.
Yes.
And yet he's looking for the lost Lenore. No, he's not. He's buried her like he did all the other broads that they give him in these movies.
I want to go back to that plot point of the doctor and Don Medina's wife, Barbara Steele, them trying to terrify him. That's straight out of Les Diaboliques. So he's borrowing not only from Psycho, but he's also borrowing from the film that Psycho borrowed from. And we have that wonderful scene where they try to either scare him to death or basically, make him insane by frightening him. And that, of course, is what triggers that transformation you were talking about, Jorge.
Well, the way Barbara interpreted that, when they were married and he was Don Medina, in the dream sequences, he's bringing her breakfast in bed. She sleeps alone. And the minute she realizes that he's no longer the milksop she was married, that he's Sebastian Medina, who's going to get she's
in trouble.
She is like, because she knows that, the Iron Maiden's about the only place she could go where she wasn't going to have to pay the piper finally. And Deborah Paget is the same way. Here, these two are married, Charles Dexter Ward and his wife. And the minute he turns into Joseph Kerr, when he comes into the bedroom, and what does he say to her? I'm about to exercise my husbandly prerogative. That wasn't what she signed up for.
Right.
She signed up for the brother and sister act, the lavender marriage. I saw these movies when I was very young. So all the things I'm saying to you now went way over my head.
Well, and that's the thing, right? The movies don't change, but we do, right? Well, and as we circle back around for some final thoughts, Dave Gray, how has this film changed for you as a viewer? Like as you're saying, you see it as a kid, obviously it's going to hit you in a different way. And how does it hit you now? Can you talk about those two experiences?
Yeah, sure. I mean, when I was a kid, this was, again, it was on all the time. This was just a cartoon to me, especially the dream sequence. I didn't get it. I didn't. And now I see what it is. It's crazy to me. I showed this to my niece, who is not quite 10. And that child is far more media savvy than I ever was at that age. So, yay for the future, I guess.
Kids are much brighter now. You're not pulling, they're not like we were, or me, Everyone is very aware of everything. Really. I don't think you can censor anything anymore. There's no point.
It's an evolving view still, I think. I appreciate a lot of it more than I ever did before on this rewatch.
Was there anything in particular that jumped out at you?
Yeah, actually, the outside of the house. When they look out at the barren, I've seen that like a dozen times, and I was finally like, oh, duh, it's out. It is so manifested. Roderick's desire to destroy himself has corrupted everything around him in his view. It's destroyed the trees. It's destroyed the town. It is so all-consuming. He can't see anything else.
Do you think it's self-fulfilling, or do you think that
100% is self-fulfilling? Just like the house falling apart is self-fulfilling. Houses will fall apart, but you've got to make sure they do when it happens that way.
Yeah.
It's all self-fulfilling. I knew that back here, but this time it's oh yeah, duh. Wow, I'm dumb.
Jorge, how about you? Is watching this as a younger person versus now, how has the movie changed for you?
I think it has influenced me as a student of dance and theater. As I've said, I was inspired by doing performances based on some movements and on some image of these films. They were part of my process of understanding my body, my language, my gestures. They paged a way I see also camera movement and performance, and I think they were part of all the package of me understanding the language of film too. And now they continue to surprise me. They continue to wonder me. I love what Dave Gray said about the self-fulfillment and the destruction. One of my favorite moments is that transition between Roderick narrating the beauty that was once Usher, the green fields and everything, and then immediately going to the decayed portraits, the twisted portraits. I think it's a wonderful transition from something ethereal that is in the past, that is perfection, that is beautiful, to something that is now rotten and depraved and ugly and distorted and demented. I think this is very, very present in the designs of Daniel Haller, because this ornate. It's very chic. It's very ornate. The props and the furniture, the chairs, the armchairs, the candelabra. It's all very, very seductive and very ornate. Everything. But then suddenly we see a cobweb and a fissure and that haunting portrait painting. I think that it's this combination between what is once beautiful and is now corroded.
Yeah, the corruption has broken it down. David Dalval, you've seen these films, you've analyzed these films.
Tarantulas around the table and everything with the cobwebs. The trouble was tarantulas don't spin webs.
Right.
So
yeah.
What were the tarantulas doing then?
They're just good. They're good TV is what they are.
No, but he said what Jorge was saying about no one's going to make movies like this anymore. But I don't know, even with CGI and AI and everything. I mean, you guys, Dave, do you think it's possible to make period Gothic horror films anymore that are going to be as entertaining as the ones we're talking about?
Possible, yes. Will it happen? No. Those are
Well,
two totally
yeah.
different things.
Because what
Yeah.
people think they want is not what they
Are going to get.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going
I
to
feel
go
that
really
way
over the
too,
top.
isn't it? It's a terrible thing to feel, and it makes me cling to all these old movies even more because it's never going to come back.
Final thoughts here on our Poe films. I feel like you kind of were bringing it in there, David, like what it is about these films that continues to endure for you.
Well, what continues to endure, which is a wonderful thing for me to say right now, and I said it to Victoria Price not that long ago because she needs to hear it. It's her dad. I said, your father is more popular now than he was when he died in 1993. And the reason for that is because of all the horror actors. Vincent Price had a sense of humor. He is laughing with you. He's not laughing at you. He's in on the joke. He knows he's hammy. He knows he's this and that. But he also knows that what he's been giving us for all that's going on forever. These movies will, I believe people will be talking about these movies forever because in a way they are works of art.
Yeah.
The way they were put together, regardless of how hastily or how much Roger was eyeing the budget. They're beautiful to look at. They're harmless. There's not a one of them that's got a thing in it you couldn't show a 10-year-old. There's not one, even the old Hammer film, The Curse of Frankenstein is like a fairy tale.
Yeah.
There is nothing in the Hammer canon until we get into the 70s that's the least bit objectionable, I don't think.
But still has that magic, that element of fantasy.
That's what it is. It's magic. Yeah. And I think that young people that are bored with what I just described, Terrifier 3 and all, they'll go back and look at these and it's be like a breath of fresh air, I hope.
It's all that David said. It's the magic, the capacity of enthralling us within the storytelling, and just not the visual patterns. I think it's all very visual. The films. I think they have a capacity of enchanting us and keeping us into a state of dream and trance. I think they are very seductive, and seduction is something that appeals to everyone. Everyone can be seductive if it allows them to. And I think these films are enchanters. They are seductive. They captivate because they put you in a state. They take you through these houses, these ambiences. They are captivating.
I was thinking about the fact, we haven't mentioned the Corman walk. Like they're always walking through these hallways and the caverns, and it's taking us to another world, to another level. Yes. And I think that's part of the magic of this, is it does transport us. David's
right. There's a magic to them that you just don't get anymore. There's a hyper real. It's kind of like the 60s Batman. I think will always be a touchstone Batman eventually to people. There's something, it's outside of our experience, and it's not wholly modern and it's not wholly old. It's future and past, and it's all in a blender together. They're unique, and you just don't get stuff like that anymore.
I was going to ask Jorge, are you familiar with Coffin Joe down there in Brazil?
Absolutely.
You know Mojica?
A legend.
You want to talk about crazy, wild movies with bats and spiders and top hats and capes?
Yes.
He produced, wrote, directed, acted. He did all that.
Yes,
and
everything.
A lot of this stuff is in black and white.
We know that he loved Corman, specifically Premature Burial, which he often spoke very highly of it.
He loved Vincent Price, too.
Yes.
That's why he wore the top hat. He loved Vincent Price, see?
Yes.
See, Vincent Price probably influenced people we aren't even aware, not even really there. Like Coffin Joe came to mind to me because you're from Brazil. I'm sure they all saw these movies down there, didn't they? And the Hammer films, too.
And the Hammer, yes.
I think you're right, David. Like these movies continue, like the tendrils, like the House of Usher seeping out into the heath. It will continue to corrupt and poison the minds for the rest of the time. Dave, did you have something you wanted to throw in there?
Well, yeah. The reason why? What is missing a lot now that they have, Coffin Joe has, you could extend it to even Ed Wood, is the let's go put on a show mentality.
Yeah.
Let's put on
These-
a show.
These were made for nothing, and they were made with passion. The passion's not always the best kind, but it's a reason why people are drawn to these, why they're drawn to Neil Breen and dozens of others. You want to know that you could do it too, or
Yeah.
that what's really driving it is love and not just money. And yeah, it's money that's driving Corman because, well, you know, Roger bled nickels and dimes, but
he
there's
wanted
more
to do
it.
this. He
Yes.
wanted to do something special. He wanted to not just keep doing what he was doing. He was like, what can I do that's something the next level?
And that's what's missing from the mainstream right now. And that is why we will never have these kinds of movies again. That's why we can't get the Gothic horrors.
Well, and when we talk about like the big studio films of 1960, those aren't necessarily the ones that we're talking about today with the same level of passion that we have for them. And I think that's what I love about having these conversations, is that it allows us to go back, look at these films through different eyes, and recognize, you know, that we're watching it now, but we're also watching it back when we first encountered them. And there's that wonderful alchemy of those two.
Well, listen, you guys should go online when we finish with this, and to tell you how, look, I get asked about the Poe films all the time, just like what I'm doing right now. I just completed 2 documentaries on Vincent Price, one for Wicked Vision in Germany and one called Vincent Price, The Art of Living, that they're just about to start. And I already filmed my talking head stuff in both of them. And they're both feature length. And I'm sure there's a couple more on the way. This is just on Price.
Yeah.
Now, there are 3 or 4 on Corman that are beyond the ones that are already out. So the interest in what we're talking about here is just getting started. See,
Yeah.
remember, when I was a kid, if I wanted to see these movies, I had to go to the drive-in or catch them on TV between commercials. There was no internet. I couldn't watch Metropolis on my phone.
Right.
Yeah, I had to walk miles to watch something at a festival. I had to take bus, subway, everything, 2 hours to watch a film that I thought we'll never see again.
But you did do it.
Yes.
That's the thing. You have the
Yes.
passion for it. And David, I know you have a great interview with Roger Corman that I'm going to provide the link for.
It's actually, you guys, it's in 5 parts. It's
Yep.
Roger and me at the Arrow Theater. We just screened Mask of the Red Death and Tales of Terror. And it's got a very funny thing where I brought these stills of the afterlife sequence in the case of Mr. Valdemar that was filmed and then cut. And Roger, who was on, we're talking there, and I brought these and I said, Roger, what happened to this sequence? And he went, well, it's in the movie. We just saw it. And I'm sitting with the whole audience there, packed theater, and they're all going, no, it wasn't there. And Roger's going, oh, well, why did I cut it? And I said, well, the only thing I can think of is that it didn't work. When Price says, I see multitudes of people, Mr. $2.98 had 12 people there being multitudes. And he looked at it in the cutting room and said, oh, I need more. I'm not going to spend the money for that. It's like Mask of the Red Death. We watched that. And he said, we shot that at Christmas time and I wasn't going to pay those extras another pound. See, that's a producer talking. That's not a director. I know directors that have mortgaged their homes to finish a movie, but that's not Roger ever.
Nope.
He's not going to get high on his own supply ever. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it's part of his, it's why Joe Dante had Roger go into a phone booth and fish out for the change. We all know he's cheap. We all know he's looking for the next dime, but that's part of his charm. And, but no, I mean, I'm sure before this year is out, I will have some kind of a discussion about the Poe films another 2 or 3 times with very different people from all over the world. I just think that more and more fans, the more fans that see these movies, want to know more about them. And listen, it's diminishing. There aren't many people like me around that knew all these people. And so I'm giving as many interviews and things as I can to give the information out there, because long when I'm gone, people will, get my thoughts on Les Baxter and Daniel Haller and Roger and Sam and Jim and all the people that are gone now that I was lucky enough to meet because I came here in 1977 from college, and everybody was still alive.
Yeah.
And I was interested enough. You know, I have an hour with Vincent Price that I paid for myself. Nobody, and you know, the same thing with Cameron Mitchell and Russ Meyer. I had all these interviews that I paid for myself because nobody was stepping up to the plate and talking to these people.
That's why I'm so grateful that you came on with us tonight.
You know, it's very important that we keep the flame burning. But I'm here to tell you that it's burning with or without us, which is good news.
Yeah. And Jorge, thank you for coming on and beaming in from Brazil. I don't know what time it is there, but I'm so thankful you.
It was the absolute pleasure for me.
And Dave, I'm always glad to see your face up in that upper right-hand corner.
I'm always happy to be here.
Looking forward to having you all on again very soon. And until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.